Good morning, student. Today in the tides lesson we are taking centrifugal and gravitational force. So due to its rotation of power or force, this force works away from the center. It is called as the centrifugal force. Any object on the earth would be thrown into the space. However, the gravitational force is working towards the center of the earth at the same time. This force is many times greater than the centrifugal force. Hence, any object on the surface of earth remains at the place where it exists. Okay. So, whichever object that remain on the earth. Now we are going to see in the tides following factors are responsible for the occurrence of tides. So which are that? So first one, the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun as well as that of the earth. Second, revolution of the earth around the sun and the indirect revolution of the sun. And third is centrifugal force generated of the earth. Now, how is the occurrence of the tide that we are seeing? So, the moon is closer to the earth than the sun. Hence, its gravitational force becomes more effective than that of the sun. Tides occur due to the relative position of the moon, the sun and the earth. A place on the earth opposite point of the place experience high or low tide, also experience high or low tide respectively at the same time. This is the result of the centrifugal force. Try to understand the locations of high and means how the occurrence of the tides is given. When there is high tide at 0 degree meridian, the 180 degree meridian also experiences high tide, and the meridian that are at right angle to those having high tide will experience low tide at the same time. So if it is high tide at 0 degree and 180 degree meridian, then which meridian will low tide occur? So we are going to see now. See, a student, one example is given. Large rockets are used to go into the space away from the earth. Which force do they act against? So they act against gravitational force. Types of tides. At the timing of the tide, it is different every day. The range of a tide also keeps on changing. Generally, the highest high tide occurs on full moon and new moon days, whereas on the days of the first and the third quarter, the high tide is at its minimum. Spring tides and neap tides are the two types of tides. Spring tides. We are going to see on new moon and full moon days the gravity of the in the same direction. Due to this, the total pull increases. Hence, the tide on these days is much higher than the average high tide. So, this is known as the spring tide. The bulge at the high tide is greater, the water much more. The water level during spring tide is higher than the average high tide and lower than the average low. As you can see in the example, see there a diagram is given. So there you can experience level of high tide. Okay. Now we are going to see about neap tide. While angle with respect to the earth and the sun twice a month. This position occurs on the first and the third quarter of each month. On both these days, the forces of both the sun and the moon operate at right angles on the earth. At the places where the sun causes high tide, the gravitational pull of the moon, which is at right angle, due to such conditions, the water level rise is less than usual at the time of high tide. Similarly, fall in water level is less than usual at the time of low tide. Means in low tide, water level is less, and in a high tide more. This is because complementary but at right angles to each other. Such tides are called as a neap tides. So, such tides are called as a neap tides. Neap tides are a little lower than the average high tides and a little higher than the average low tides, as you can see in the figure.